listener production.
Hey, Benzion Siebert here with The Briefing. All of us at some stage have felt shame about our body. It can start when you're very young, the sense that something about you just isn't right and needs changing. We've moved on a lot from the world I and other millennials grew up in. The language many of us use around our bodies has arguably become more inclusive, more open and less misogynistic over time. But a new report suggests that whatever change our society may have undergone over the past 20 or 30 years, body shame persists and might even be getting worse. More than 1,000 women and people with labia across the country were surveyed for a new report from Women's Health Victoria out today with some surprising results. It found labia shame was significantly more common among Gen Z, with more than a third of those aged 18 to 24 associating their labia with negative words such as weird, disgusting or ugly. More than 40% of those surveyed reported putting off seeing a GP for sexual and reproductive health issues or a pap smear because of this shame. And 10% reported that they had considered getting labiaplasty, plastic surgery to reduce or increase the size of labia. So what's behind all this shame, and what does it tell us about Australian society in 2024? Dr. Melissa Kang is a GP, a long-time Dolly Doctor columnist, and the author of Welcome to Sex and Welcome to Consent. Dr. Kang, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. Tell us what this report found.
The key findings had to do with what we call genital body image among labia owners, women and people with labia. And that age range included, Generation Z and millennials predominantly. I think the good news was that about a third of the survey respondents felt really positive about their labia, but there was a considerable shift in the younger age group, so those aged perhaps in their adolescent years to their late 20s were more likely to have anxiety or shame related to mainly the appearance of their labia. I used to answer a lot of questions from Dolly Doctor readers over the years before the magazine closed about labia and concern about the appearance of their labia. So the fact that this is still a major issue was something that's of concern to me.
Is it possible to pinpoint where these feelings of shame are coming from, and also why there is that distinction between younger people and older people?
Sure. Well, the hypothesis or the theory, and some of this was played out in the survey that's been released this week, was to do with what younger women and labia owners are seeing online, particularly online pornography, but also on social media. And there seems to be a relationship between those factors.
I suppose blaming pornography is something that makes intuitive sense here, but also pornography now is a lot more diverse than it ever has been. I suppose porn magazines were a very specific type of woman, a very specific type of figure. Why is it that that much more diverse range of pornography isn't having the opposite effect that it might?
I guess my theory is that as access to pornography became more and more ubiquitous over the years, that perhaps half a generation ago or a generation ago, adolescent girls, and this would come up for me in answering Dolly Doctor questions, were becoming quite concerned and would ask a lot of questions about how to remove pubic hair. So that was one sort of trend that seemed to occur. And people had done research quite a few years ago now that demonstrated probably a link between witnessing hairless labia on online pornography and the need to then remove their pubic hair because that was seen as normal and what people would expect of a young woman growing up. What that then revealed, of course, if you remove your pubic hair, you can see the outline and the appearance of your labia, so the outer labia and the inner labia. And of course, younger women were then seeing all this diversity or expressing at least concern that what their labia looked like wasn't the same as what they were seeing on online porn. The ability to see a lot of labia online, that has generated new questions that people don't talk about. And I think that's the other issue, is that as a doctor working with young people in a clinic, it was not something that young women would bring up with me about the appearance of their labia. So I think there's this kind of taboo about talking about it as well.
Do you think that it might be a chicken and egg situation when it comes to pornography, especially because so much porn is now, OnlyFans, it's amateur, it's people in their bedrooms that are not necessarily being paid by Brazzers or some porn company, that this is a reflection of societal norms coming back the other way rather than pornography?
I think it's an ever-changing and dynamic field. You're right. It's not a one-way relationship, and it changes and it evolves over time. I think what possibly hasn't yet changed, what we haven't caught up with, is the way that women, particularly young women and labia owners, and also gender diverse young people, are marginalised, are perhaps more concerned about their attractiveness, their sexual attractiveness, and have an expectation that they need to appear and behave in a certain way. And then, of course, we've got the gender diverse communities, intersex communities, who, again, their genitals will potentially appear different as well. And we've got a long way to go before we are truly inclusive and celebrate genital diversity in all of its, shapes and sizes and appearances.
Today's report mentions that 1 in 10 respondents say that they've had or are considering having labiaplasty. Is this worrying, or should we consider it in the same way as other body modifications that people get these days?
I think the reason to be concerned is about the motivation behind it. And if it's to do with feeling inadequate, imperfect, abnormal in relation to genitals and labiaplasty as a form of surgically changing the appearance of one's genitals, I think it seems to be linked to this sense of shame about one's own completely natural and well-functioning body. There are risks to any kind of surgical procedure. Of course, people have the right to seek cosmetic changes to their bodies and to seek advice and perhaps treatment for that. But when it's motivated by an immense feeling of inadequacy or unattractiveness or shame about the appearance of one's body, I think that's what's of concern.
What does a good labia look like, quote unquote, good labia? What does that mean?
I think that a good labia is one's labia, full stop, really. I think that what the Labia Library, which has been a wonderful resource, I used to refer my own patients to it, and certainly when it came into being and I was still writing for Dolly Doctor, I'd refer readers to the Labia Library. What it really does is kind of blow open a whole lot of myths about labia. And it's really worth a visit to the website to get a whole lot of information about what labia do, why they're there, how they can work for you, as well as taking viewers to photographs of, real people, diverse number of people who have had their labia photographed. So I think the whole point of the Labia Library and the whole point of this recent report and the relaunch of the website is to let viewers know that labia are extremely diverse, and we don't have to be ashamed of what we have if we think that they look different from other people. But also just to let people know, give people a sense of the diversity of labia that's out there.
Teaching people in Australia about reproductive health is very complicated. There's a wide range of opposing views on what people should be taught, at what age, by whom. How do you suggest that we approach teaching young people about what a labia looks like in a safe and comfortable way?
That's a great question. I'm a huge advocate for what we call comprehensive sexuality education. It's certainly the World Health Organization and UNESCO's statement is that all children and young people deserve comprehensive sexuality education. And I won't go into what that means. It's one can look that up online, what the definition of that is. But essentially, one of the things that colleagues and I who advocate for comprehensive sexuality education say is that when we start teaching young children how to name their body parts, their nose and their ears and their hands and their feet, that we start to teach them the correct language for their genitals as well, so that they're familiar with the terminology. That's considered to be a protective reason, actually. So it's that sort of child protective behaviours, so that if something inappropriate happens to a child, they will have the language to describe that. That's one of the reasons. But from my point of view, it's also just empowering. It's actually saying this is a natural, normal part of the body, and we learn to talk about them appropriately. So we can then start to talk about, well, as a labia owner goes through puberty, they will notice a change in size and shape, and pubic hair will grow, and they'll start to experience, some wetness and lubrication in the coming out of the vagina, in the same way we talk about penises growing and testicles and pubic hair growing there as well. And look, I certainly know. I know that it's awkward, that it can be difficult. I get asked by parents about how to talk to their children about what's changing in their bodies. But I suppose that's why something like the Labia Library and even this conversation is important, and for us to keep talking about these things, so that they no longer, they feel as natural as talking about, I don't know, how your food gets digested in the digestive system, for example. So I think that we just need to understand that genitals and reproductive organs are part of the human body, and that children and young people deserve to have all the accurate scientific information about what to expect as their bodies change through those adolescent years.
Well, Melissa Kang, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. This has been really fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Melissa Kang there. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Briefing. We love it when you share this podcast with your friends, so please do so. If you'd like to have more of The Briefing in your life, you can also catch up on special interviews on our YouTube channel. Just search LISTNR Newsroom, that's Listener Newsroom, on YouTube, and hit subscribe. The team will be back in your feed tomorrow morning from 6. I'm Ben Sion Siebert. Catch you later.